Greg Jefferson is the business editor of the San Antonio Express-News. Tony Quesada joins us. He's the editor-in-chief of the San Antonio Business Journal. And this is The Conversation Continues. Tony, you have just edited a very extensive report on gender parity in San Antonio corporations. What have you learned if there's a 15-year-old girl who is a fast starter and wants to make it in the business world? What have you learned is the key to success for women today?
Well, there is no one key. That's the one thing you can take away, is that there is no one key. It's going to take a multi-pronged approach to do it. That means things like at the education level, but mentorship. Women need mentors just like men. A lot of the keys to success are going to be the exact same. It's just that women haven't always had the access to it. So it's things like financing, mentorship, training, just opportunity. Having someone champion you and say, I recognize potential in you, and I'm going to give you an opportunity. You have to be very intentional about it. And if that happens, because if companies that are predominantly men at the corporate leadership, but they're going to have to reach down and see the women that are working for them, or at other places maybe, and recruit in their recruiting efforts.
Greg, have you found that it's more difficult for a woman to get that kind of notice and mentorship, especially in largely male companies? We were talking on the TV side about tech. Mm-hmm. Is it difficult for a woman to get that notice that Tony just talked about men get?
No, I mean, in most industries, you have decades upon decades of lack of parity between the sexes. So yeah, of course, women are going to have a harder time rising to the top. There are just fewer mentorship opportunities for women than there are men. And in those those in the room making the decision about who gets promoted, often those are all men, or at least a solid majority men. So yeah, it's tough to get ahead.
Tony, some countries, as you know, have passed laws requiring parity on boards and sometimes parity in the C-suites as well.
California as well.
Right. Is that a good idea after you did this study?
Legislation is also on the table in a lot of communities. Because a lot of these laws are still relatively new. We're not sure how they're working, whether they actually achieve the result that they're trying to achieve. But accountability has got to be part of the equation. If you want a result, someone's going to have to be held accountable for that result.
Greg, big week for the automotive industry. We're becoming a new Detroit, it seems like, especially on the south side, in a good way.
Kinda, yeah.
And you mentioned that
without the decay. So yeah.
You mentioned we're going to be at the leading edge of some robotics developments. Talk a little bit about what Toyota plans to do.
So Toyota announced on Tuesday that it's going to invest $391 million in its San Antonio plant, which currently manufactures Tundras and Tacoma pickup trucks. So a lot of what this money is going to be paying for, we believe, is kind of production technology, much more cutting-edge stuff than they have in place now, just to make the process more efficient. But when you're talking about automakers, higher efficiency often means bringing in artificial intelligence, including robots and what are called cobots, which are basically robots that kind of work in tandem with flesh and blood workers.
Now, that should lay the groundwork, though, for San Antonio to become a leader in robotics, and that may bring in some jobs, too.
Well, yeah, and you're actually at Port San Antonio, which is not too far off from the Toyota plant. You are seeing several robotics firms moving in. It'll be interesting to see how robotics takes off as an industry, as kind of an offshoot of San Antonio's tech scene in the years to come. I mean, I think you're as likely to see more successful robotics firms as you are software firms.
Yeah, one of the big things is going to be how well they can be reprogrammed.
Right.
Because if a robot is programmed to do one task and then you need a new task, if that same robot can be retasked, then that makes it very valuable.
Yeah, and that's actually, I mean, that's probably the factory job of the future. It's not going to be so much production line work as it is operating and maintaining and creating software for these robots. Greg
Jefferson, business editor of the San Antonio Express-News. Tony Quesada, thank you for joining us. You're the editor-in-chief of the San Antonio Business Journal, and thank you for joining us today on The Conversation Continues.